Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today we have a knife from Tuyaknife. This is the Argon, and this was sent to me for review by Tuyaknife USA, and I'll put the link down there in the description box below. Dave Warren is the guy who looks after things over there. Sorry about that. Not only can I not talk because my voice is a little rough, but I can't talk because my brain and mouth don't seem to be connected right now. Anyway, so this was sent to me for review. I will also give some credit. I had a couple of viewers who are big fans of Tuya knives and were kind of, prompting me to get one and check it out. And in fact, even Dave weighed in on the conversation over on the Sharp Stuff Facebook page. By the way, if you're not a member of the Sharp Stuff Facebook page, it's just a place where we discuss knife stuff and channel related stuff. I'll ask questions about the channel, that kind of thing. And I'll put a link to that Facebook page down below as well. We try to have some fun. I also, update you with, hey, these videos are coming up. I share some older videos that haven't been getting much love lately that I think are really good. And yeah, so anyway, if you're interested, go ahead and ask to join that Facebook group and I will add you as soon as I get a chance. Let's get back to the knife itself. Actually, before we do, one more thing. I am wearing a Band-Aid. Before all of you make comments about what happened and, you're a knife reviewer with Band-Aid, I was playing with a balisong and kind of messed up a little bit, and now I have a little cut. It's not the end of the world. I will probably survive, and that's my opinion as a first responder. This was the balisong that caused the injury. And, so imagine what would happen if it actually had a blade. No wonder they're illegal in Canada. By the way, that's not exactly what happened, but I thought that would be a fun story. And since this is the internet, I can kind of tell you whatever I want. Let's go ahead and get into the knife itself, beginning with the overall size and weight and how this guy carries in pocket. This knife is 8 3/8 inches overall. The blade is 3.5 inches. The handle is 4 7/8 when it's closed. And this guy weighs in at 4.64 ounces, which, by the way, for a knife of this size is actually quite good. And that's one of the things I really like about this knife is the overall weight is pretty good. It's also fairly slim, and those two things do make this a very easy knife to carry around with you. Gotta say, I appreciate that. The blade itself, which is what we normally talk about next. And again, this blade is pretty impressive. We've got a high flat grind, satin flats, stone wash on the bevels. Notice it's almost a standard blade shape if this just went perfectly straight, but it does have just a bit of a drop there, so we call this a drop point blade. They've done a good job on the plunge grind here, and we've got no, thickening, smiling back here, which I do really appreciate. The other thing I think they've done really, really well is gotten a really good balance. And so, when this is a little bit of my preference. Some YouTubers will kind of complain about blade stock being a little bit thick. I prefer a thicker blade stock, especially for an EDC knife, because I may be doing some things that are a little heavier duty with my pocket knife than I would be, let's say, with a knife I take out of my kitchen drawer to cut up, sliced cheese or cut my kids' sandwiches or something. So I want that little bit of extra thickness in the blade. I do appreciate that, but then the grind needs to be done in such a way that I still get a pretty thin edge geometry. And this one has actually done a really nice job. This blade slices very well. And that's not just for what it is, okay? Normally you'd say it slices very well for a knife with this thick a blade stock, but this just really slices well in general. So I've got to give them a lot of credit. They have really gotten that overall blade geometry really, really nice. So I'll give some credit for that. I also kind of like this blade design. It's simple, it's straightforward, it does the things that I need it to do. The one complaint that I have, and it's not a big deal, but this swedge being a little bit thicker down here means that when I choke up on the knife, the spot where I want to put my thumb is thinner than the blade is just a little further out. Often the way I compensate for that is actually move my thumb out. If I'm doing any kind of harder cutting task, that gives me a little more surface area to push on than back here where it's a little thinner. But otherwise, I really do find this blade to be quite good and have been really, really impressed with it overall. Just from a user standpoint, from a design standpoint, I think they've gotten a lot of things right here. Let's move on now to lockup and deployment. So we have a titanium frame lock flipper on bearings, so pretty common stuff for what we're used to seeing today. The flipper is a little more elevated than it needs to be. You can see when I flip the knife, I normally end up on the point rather than on the flat. It light switches well. Let's see, it push buttons pretty well also, so you can kind of do whatever you like with this. The detent isn't super stiff. It's I don't know. It's pretty well right where you want it, right? I wouldn't call this a hard detent. I wouldn't call it a soft detent. I would just call it a functional detent, okay? The smoothness is definitely there. It's not the smoothest knife I've ever had, but it's definitely nice, and you can tell that they've paid a little bit of attention to try and get a decent quality knife here. And I've actually had feedback from a number of different users on Tuya knives in general, not just on this model, and most people have been pretty happy with the performance in terms of, you know, smoothness and that kind of thing. The one thing I have heard a little bit is that these guys can be tough to take apart. One, you don't have a Torx bit over here. You have a slot, which can be a pain in the neck. But the other thing is, this is an unrestrained pivot, or at least I suspect it is. I haven't actually taken this knife apart, just haven't had time. I don't always take every single knife apart, just so you know that, unless I feel like I need to figure something out. That you know is an important part of the review here. If I can figure out everything I need to with the knife together, then I don't bother. That's lockup and deployment is quite good. It's comfortable. The lock bar tension is set really nicely. The detent is set really nicely. This is definitely a knife you can play with for prolonged periods of time and not get uncomfortable or not get your fingers all mangled up. I have had knives where, you know, after the 100th flip or so, you know, your fingers start to feel it a little bit. Maybe part of that is just, and I don't get that too often anymore just because I built up some calluses, but this knife is actually quite comfortable. I don't think anyone is going to have those kinds of issues. So yeah, in terms of lockup and deployment, the action is smooth. It's easy to actuate. I have no big complaints. Everything works basically as it should. Now, what about construction? Well, there's a couple points I want to make here. The first is, of course, the intricate milling that they've done here. It kind of looks like a topo map with this being sort of a mountaintop here. I'm not sure I totally love that design. It's not horrible or anything like that. I don't hate it, but I don't love it. I would be probably just as happy with this knife if it was just slab titanium, but it does add certainly a degree of visual interest. The anodizing is again something that I'm fine with. You know, I'm not totally in love with the varying anodizing they've done here, but it's not bad. And I know some people will really like it. I guess the other point that I should make here is that for this price point, to get this level of work and this level of attention to detail is pretty impressive. All right. It's a backspacer construction rather than standoffs, although it's very open. So essentially they've done just a small backspacer and you kind of get the best of both worlds. Single position pocket clip. It is milled titanium and it actually works pretty well. You've got a nice little ramp coming under here. It's definitely, hold on. There we go. It's definitely springy enough that I have no problem getting this in and out of pocket. So other than the fact that it's for right-hand users only, I think the pocket clip is done pretty well. Finally, the cutout here for the lanyard, I don't know. They've got this little groove to allow the lanyard to kind of lay flat against the knife, which seems like, I don't know, just unnecessary to me. It sort of detracts from the design a little bit because it breaks up these lines as they're running around here. Not the end of the world. I think this knife would have been a good knife to do an integrated lanyard where the lanyard was part of the backspacer. They didn't do that. And I do feel like that detracts a little bit from the overall look of the knife. But again, not a huge issue. In terms of ergonomics, that's one where I've got to give some extra points because, well, I don't know about how the look of this knife turns out with the layered milling there. I will say that those layers do actually add some traction as well as the fairly nicely balanced jimping. It's not too sharp. It's not too soft. I could have used maybe another, you know, 1/4 inch of jimping, maybe come up to here because my thumb tends to land right around here, which is mostly past the jimping. I guess I have larger hands than some. The other thing is, of course, I like the fact that you can choke up, and this has been done pretty well, okay? Some knives, I feel like I'm surrendering a lot of edge in order to get this front finger choil. On this knife, I think they've done a pretty good job of kind of balancing out. I feel like I have lots of blade, more than enough to get everything done that I want to do, while I still get that nice finger choil. And this is not a massively huge knife either. So all of that comes together to say I do like the ergonomics on this knife quite a bit. All right, so however you feel about the look of this handle, I've got to say I do really like the way it feels in hand. Let's go ahead and get to some comparisons. Now, I've got to say this, guys. I'm not going to pull in a bunch of overseas made, Senran Muse and CH knives and all of that. I don't really put Tuyaknives in the same class as them, especially because, if nothing else, of the very purposeful entrance into the U.S. market, the U.S. representation, all of those things. I say, put these in a slightly different category, probably more in line with Best Tech or even Kaiser than, some of the other companies that are out there. So I do have some overseas made knives, but they're just going to be Kaisers and Riots rather than some of the other options that are out there. And this is going to be cheaper, at least for the moment. I'm pretty sure that the price point on these is going to probably get a little closer to the $200 mark as we move forward. I think they've come in with just really aggressive marketing or really aggressive pricing to sort of make a place for themselves in the market. And then once they're more established, they'll probably push those prices up a little bit. So let's go ahead and get to some of the comparisons. So this is a Kaiser knife. This is the Kaiser Uprising that I've been carrying around lately, and I've actually really been enjoying this knife. Very similar in size, obviously a very, very different blade shape, but Kaisers, I think, make a good comparison. I got a couple more. Here is the Kaiser Quicksilver. Again, quite a bit different, although, if you like this knife, I could maybe see you liking this knife. It's a little more flashy. There's a little more design stuff going on. Even the Uprising, I would say, has that visual stuff happening. A slightly smaller option would be the Kaiser Quarto, while still getting all of that blade length, but you get a much smaller package, so it's going to carry a little lighter. Of course, one of the things we pretty well always want to throw in here is the Chris Reeve, mostly because people are so familiar with it, right? Everyone kind of knows the size, they know the construction, so this should give you kind of a good idea of the size of this knife. What else have we got here? Let's pull in a couple of ZTs. I will say, guys, the fact that ZT does what they do for the price points that they hit is really good. This, of course, is the Zero Tolerance 0393. This is the 0609, both new ZTs for this year. And again, I've got to give ZT a lot of credit, considering that they're competing directly with overseas produced knives and coming in at a price point that's close enough to make them competitive. Finally, probably my favorite overseas produced knife, actually definitely my favorite overseas produced knife from my favorite overseas company. This is the Riot Torrent, which is really, really nicely done. Not super comparable, right? These are in quite a different price category, but just to kind of give you an idea of the kind of stuff that's coming in from China, I thought I'd throw that out there just as a reminder that we're not dealing with, companies that can't produce some pretty high-end stuff. Now, back to the knife itself. Now that we've seen all of those comparisons, how do I think this knife stacks up? Well, compared to those and many other knives, I think this knife does really well. In terms of budget, it's fairly comfortably priced. I think these go for around $150 US. They've done a really, really good job of making a very usable knife here. It fits well in hand. It's extremely comfortable. The blade is extremely good. This, as I said, I like a thicker blade, but often am frustrated by the fact that the thicker blades don't cut as well, but this one cuts really, really nicely. So I think Tuyaknives has done a really good job on the Argon here. I can't, of course, speak for all of their other designs, but if the quality is to the same level as this one, I think most people are going to be pretty darn impressed. There are a few more reviewers out there who have taken a look at this, so go and follow up and check out those as well. And also go and check out the Facebook page for Tuyaknife USA. Hopefully they'll have something over there that you're interested in. Thanks a lot for the viewers who suggested I check this out. Thanks to Dave for sending this along. And thank all of you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And what the heck, you may as well push the notification button too, so that you get a little bell dinging whenever I put something up here on the good old interwebs. Talk to you soon.